A lot of us Christians ask the question, how can I effectively share my faith with other people? We may come to them with arguments or some other type of reasoning, but I think the most effective way you can share your faith with someone else is to simply share your story, what God has done in your life, how you came to have a relationship with Him, and how that relationship has played out over the years. Christians call this story their testimony, and I'm excited to be able to share my testimony with you guys right now. So I always believed in God, but there was certainly a time where I didn't have a relationship with Him. So I was born into a Catholic family, but religion never really played a big part in anyone's lives. We didn't really go to church or anything like that when I was very young. And at the age of 4, my family moved from New Jersey down to Florida to start a new life. And I didn't really have a problem with either of my parents, but their relationship was very rocky. And it culminated in one day when I was maybe 5. I think it was my sister's 3rd birthday. My dad packed up the car and he up and left, went back to New Jersey. So I was raised by a single mom for a while, and it was just her and my sister and I. And as you can imagine, things were pretty rough. I dealt with a lot of confusion and a lot of anger after the abandonment. My parents ultimately divorced eventually, and it was just rough going forward. I took all that anger out on my mom and my sister. I went from being a happy-go-lucky kid to really just kind of being a big anger ball. And I remember at that point, my mom didn't really know what to do, so she just turned to God, and she was trying to pray with my sister and I before bed each night. So we'd say our little poems. Now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep, and so on and so forth. But there wasn't really any deep meaning to it. I just knew that God existed. He created the world, but He was very far away, and certainly I couldn't really know Him. And it wasn't until a few years later that my mom met a man at her job, and they started dating, and eventually they married. So he became my stepdad, and it was really rough going forward after that. Him and I would just really clash with each other. For a while, I was the man of the house, so having this new guy come in, it was not going over well. So the dynamic in the house was kind of like a war zone, and I would just argue with everybody and just bully my sister and just really butt heads with my stepdad. And my mom just thought, we have to do something. So she decided, hey, let's try going to church and actually try to go consistently. But we were Catholic, so we ended up going to Catholic Mass, and I was dragged there kicking and screaming. And then when we got there, you look around and it was pretty much old people, at least in my Catholic church. And I was just like, this is weird. Really pretty, but this is weird. But even though we started to go to church consistently, it still felt kind of empty and hollow, at least for me personally. I still felt like God was just an idea, maybe even an idea that we invented. So I remember even during that time, crying myself to sleep at night. As I lay there with my head against the pillow, I would just shut my eyes and just cry thinking about death. I was just terrified of the idea of death because I didn't really know what happened after, and I didn't have the faith to be assured that there was a heaven. So I would imagine my mom dying, and then what? I'm left with my sister and my stepdad. I was like, oh, that's horrible. So I would just cry myself to sleep, and I would think, what if we just invented heaven? What if it's just made up? What if when we die, it's just like it was before we were born, just this oblivion? I was thinking pretty deep. I was having these thoughts, and it was very scary. And it was during this time that I really looked to my grandfather as my father figure. He was really my best friend growing up. Meanwhile, the problems in the household persisted. The arguments kept coming. The shouting fits kept happening. And eventually my mom had another friend who invited her to a non-denominational Christian church. And at first she was hesitant because she's like, we're Catholic, I don't know. But eventually she said, yeah, sure, we'll go check it out. So she brings the whole family over to a Calvary Chapel over here in Port St. Lucie, Florida. And it was just so different. And walking in, I instantly felt different. And the teaching was resonating with me in a way that I had never experienced before. The worship was different than anything I had experienced before, and I began to be open to the idea of belonging to a church and finding a community there. And it got to the point where I actually enjoyed going to church on the weekends, which was really weird, but I did. And I remember one Sunday in particular in 2013, so I was 12 years old, the pastor gave an altar call where he said, if there's anybody in here who never dedicated their life to Jesus, you want to receive him as your Savior and follow him as your Lord, just slip up your hand. And I was thinking, I'm already a Christian. I believed in God my whole life, really. I don't need to do that. And then I look around and I see one person raises their hand and everyone starts clapping. And another person raises their hand, everyone starts clapping. And then with each hand that went up, my heart just started to race a little faster and faster and faster. And then I remember looking at my mom and I just said, I think I'm going to stand up. And then I stood up and everybody around me was looking up and clapping. And then I looked down at my mom, she's crying. And then I start crying. And it was a really emotional moment. And then I remember walking out of the church and I looked over at my mom and I asked her, I said, so if I were to die right now, because I just received Jesus, I would go to heaven for sure. And she looked at me and she said, yes. And I just remember the peace that just washed over me in that moment, because death was something that I was terrified of. And the afterlife was something I had doubted, but now there was so much assurance, not in myself, but in Jesus. And after that, I was on a spiritual high, and 2 weeks later, I was actually baptized at the beach along with my sister, my mom, and my grandma. So it was kind of like a family baptism. And I thought everything was going to be really good going forward. Everything was going to be a lot different. And it was different, but it wasn't good. About 2 days after I was baptized, I remember my sister shaking me to wake me up. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, what? Because it was a school night. I'm angry at her. And then she says, Grandpa's in the hospital. And I don't know what's going on. So I instantly get out of bed, I get dressed, and it seems serious. My mom loads us up in the car and we drive over to my grandma's house. And when we get there, I just see her standing outside and I see an ambulance in front of her house and they're loading him into the ambulance. And my heart just drops. I was terrified. He had been a lifelong smoker, so I don't know if that caused this or what, but he ended up having a brain aneurysm. And they rushed him to the hospital, and then they flew him with a helicopter to JFK Medical Center. And they operated on him instantly, and he went into a coma after the surgery. And we had family flying him down from Jersey because of the whole incident. And now it's just a waiting game. So it's about a couple days after he was in a coma, I had been praying fervently, God, please, please, please don't take him. God, I just gave my life to you. Please don't do this. And sure enough, he ended up passing away. He never woke up from that coma. I never even got to say goodbye to him. And as you can imagine, I was wrecked. It felt like I lost my father for the second time now. So I turned away. I kind of fell from God. And I was worse than I had ever been in my life in terms of my mental state and my demeanor towards other people and the way I viewed the world. It was really harsh. It was really bitter. It was really angry. And it was really kind of hopeless. You can ask any of my buddies from middle school. In 7th grade, this all happened. So they could tell you from 6th grade to 7th grade, I was a totally different person. Not in a good way. I started to hang out with the wrong crowds and got into some bad influences. Had some bad relationships with people who were not good for me. And I just kind of stopped caring about God and faith and sin. I thought that if God really loved me, if God was really there, he wouldn't have let that happen. So it took me about a year, maybe a little more, to come back to God. And how that happened was my mom was praying for me the whole way, and she actually invited me to, more like forced me, to go to a guest speaker who was going to be visiting the church. And I obviously didn't want to go, but she signed me up to serve, so I had to hold the doors open. And we get in there, and I kind of have my arms crossed, don't want to be there. And he just started speaking about the cross, and he started speaking about Christianity as a whole. And he was really just stressing the importance of the gospel and its necessity for us to have life abundantly and eternally. And I just remember he played a video clip at the end, and it basically said that Christianity is on the decline in Europe and America and the global north. And we as Christians should feel heartbroken. We as Christians should feel motivated to do something about this. And the last words just rang in my ear and in my heart. And it just said, like, Christians, this is a call to action. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get right with God again. I need to seek him out, and I need to tell other people about him, because this whole faith thing is way bigger than me. So I decided to get serious about God again, and I rededicated my life to him. And things were different at that point. So 8th grade, I was a lot different than I was in 7th grade. And I began to be inspired to share my faith with others, and to genuinely be intentional about being a light and a good example to other people, so I can possibly lead them to Jesus through what I say and what I do. And that carried on into high school, where there was a lot of bad influences around me, but I was so sure of my faith, and I was so on fire for Jesus, that I looked around, and instead of getting discouraged by the things going on around me or the way people were, I was actually motivated. And I was like, yes, this is where I need to be. I feel like my purpose is clear. And throughout high school, I was going to church religiously, so every weekend. And I was learning a lot about the Bible. I was fascinated by it, fascinated by God, and just studying. So I was learning a lot, and for the sake of having conversations with other people about my faith. But it was really all a bunch of head knowledge. And I really needed to put it more into practice beyond just my words. And I didn't realize that until I met with a pastor. This was maybe late sophomore year of high school. And he looked at me, he's like, what do you want to do, when you grow up? And I was so on fire for Jesus. I was like, well, I think I'm called to ministry. I'm probably going to be a pastor. And he looks at me and he says, you want to be a pastor, but you're not serving anywhere? And I was like, hit with conviction. And in that moment, I was like, yeah, that's a really good point. So I decided to join a couple different serve teams and hopped around until I found the right fit. But I started doing something that I really loved, and it was a big turning point in my early life, was leading a Bible study at my parents' house. So I led a group for teenagers, and I loved leading that group. It was the only group like it at my church. So we started to grow, and it was just really amazing to delve into Bible studies and to worship together and even do serve projects together. And I genuinely developed friendships with these people. So we did life together, and that was really special and really awesome to have at that point in life. So I ended up going on my first mission trip, which was awesome. We went to Haiti with the church, and I actually went all by myself. I didn't really know the people I was there with, and I didn't go with any friends or family. So it was a big step for me, and to be able to be on the ground doing ministry in a whole nother country was just so special. But I did realize, hey, I don't think I want to be a long-term missionary. And as high school started to come to an end, I knew that I wanted to work in ministry. I felt called to ministry. So I had to go to a Bible college, obviously, and I decided to go to Southeastern University over in Lakeland, Florida. So not too far from home where I'd freak out, but it's also far enough where I feel like I'm going away to college. So it was nice. And it was at Southeastern that my mental health started to really become a problem again. I hadn't really dealt with that since I was a little kid, but it started to resurface. And while I was at Southeastern, I was surrounded by Christians, and I thought, wow, this is going to be great. But then I started to compare myself with everybody around me, and it made me not feel special anymore. You see, in middle school and high school, I went to public schools, and it was easy to kind of feel good about myself because I was like, hey, I know Jesus, I have a relationship with God, and I'm saved, and I'm living as righteously as I possibly can. And I'm here to shine a light onto those around me. Like, I'm here and I'm doing God's work. But then I went off to college and I see that everybody else was on fire just like I was. Some of them seemed to be even more on fire than me. And they just wanted to get out of there and become a dentist or a school teacher or all these other careers. And I was just like, what? They're impacting people for Jesus. They're on fire for their faith, and they just want to be normal people when they get out of here. They don't want to become a big pastor or anything like that and change the world. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And while it once was amazing to be in a room full of so many Christians praying and worshiping together, now it started to make me feel invisible. And I know it's easy to confuse God's silence for his absence, but this is something I continually struggled with. And since leaving college, I went on to work in ministry, which was a great opportunity. And I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about some character flaws and mental strongholds that I'd carried for a long time. And there have been several personal events along the way that have made me question my past, present, and future, and even my devotion to the Lord. So there were times where I just finished a message and I would ask myself, do you really believe what you were just preaching? And my mental health was up and down, but there were definitely times where life felt a bit overwhelming. And it wasn't uncommon for my feelings to make me doubt my faith as a whole sometimes. But what really rooted me in Christianity has been my knowledge. That's one thing I'm super grateful for. I've seen so many things. I've heard so many things. I've been a part of so many things. And I know that God is real. I know that Jesus is Lord. And I believe wholeheartedly that it's the worldview that makes the most sense. So at times when my heart would wander or want to wander, my mind would anchor me in place and I would be able to stand firm on God's word. And this is a very general overview of my story. There's so much more I could say, but I've learned to appreciate the journey. So I've been in a journey through the dark tunnel, just stumbling towards the light. And I wish I could say, oh, there's a big happy ending to all this, but my life's not over yet. My story's not done. And I do believe that there's going to be brighter days ahead. I mean, life isn't terrible right now. I've been doing all right. And I anticipate seeing just what God's going to do in my life and how he's going to continue to shape me, mold me, continue to make me more like him and less like me, because that's what this whole thing is. This whole journey with God is a process of being restored to become more like Jesus over time. And I really just look forward to seeing where he takes me. With all that being said, I want you to remember 3 things. 1, it's that your story is special. It's unique. No one else has your story. It's not better or worse than somebody else's. It's just different. And that's what makes it amazing. 2, it's that it's not too late to turn your life around. We all have a messed up past, but God can take that mess and turn it into his message for his glory. And 3, your story isn't over. Your testimony is still happening each day. There's still things that God is doing in your life, even beyond the veil of your vision. He's working. And if you love him, Scripture promises that he's working all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose.